Take each game on its merits there.
Hello, and you're very welcome to the latest episode of Each Game on Its Merits with myself, Aon Riordan, and
Jerry Farrell. Hello.
And we're now today talking about what is considered to be in FAI history the first senior soccer international that the FAI international side played, even though we feel differently because all of our previous episodes have been about the Olympic side. But anyway, if you go through the annals of history,
yes. As it stands
currently, the FAI considered this game against the Italians in 1926 to be the first international. Now, what we'll start by talking about is maybe this book here, which I think is a great book, Donald Cullen's book, which is Ireland on the Ball, and it goes through every game ever played, and he says that this is the first international, right? Okay, so the previous games were considered to be amateur internationals, declassified in the 60s, so if we're going to go...
And just to summarise, we've done our 1924 games. The last game we've done is our home game against the USA, which is 1924, so we're nearly 2 years after.
And we hammered them.
We beat them 3-1, but that's the summer of 1924. We're now coming into March 1926, so nearly 2 years later, we haven't played an international match.
Now, the link between that game and this game, Ned Brooks gets a hat-trick against the Americans.
Yes.
And he's due to go in this game to Italy, but tragedy strikes.
Yes, so we'll talk a little bit about the team lineup and all that, but the centre forward berth is probably the most discussed and controversial selection in this game. So Ned Brooks, who's been going great guns, who's scoring loads of goals in the League of Ireland Shield at the time. He's a real player who's in form. We've said he's not selected for the Olympic squad because he's played professionally in England, previously with Stockport.
Yeah.
But he's going great. He's going to be the starting centre forward. He's selected to travel to the Italy match, and then tragedy strikes just days beforehand. He lives in Rathmines. His son Harold is playing with friends in the street. He's 7 years old, and he gets hit by a car and is killed. And it's very tragic. There's even the reports in the newspapers talk about him being rushed to hospital. His father, Ned, goes there with him. He gives him a blood transfusion, but the little boy doesn't survive. And obviously, he can't travel. He's not going to travel. His son has just been tragically killed, so he's out of the team, and he's not traveling. So the question then becomes, who takes his place now? This is a big game. Obviously, we mentioned that there's one of those probables versus possibles matches beforehand. So they play open to the public, 22-man panel, 11v11 of players to kind of pick the squad. One of those, two players are picked in those teams: Fran Waters of Shelburne and Billy Juicy Farrell. And we were saying they love a nickname back then. Juicy Farrell, one of the famous 4Fs of Shamrock Rovers.
No relation.
There's no one juicy in my family. Hey. But yeah, Flood, Farrell, Fagan and Fulham are the 4Fs of the great Shamrock Rovers forward line. Billy Juicy Farrell, if you listen to...
Whenever you watch Rovers, you tend to mutter words beginning with F.
Yes, indeed. But, he's one of the great... He's from Bray originally. He's a smashing player, great, skillful, talented player. But he's been in bad form recently. He's coming back from an injury. He doesn't have a great game in this kind of selection match, the probables versus possibles. And then he plays for a Leinster versus Munster selection. He has a bad game in that, so he's not selected, and that's kind of controversial. And he's probably one of those great players from that era who's very unlucky to never win a cap because he's not selected for this match, and then has a bad injury in a motorcycle accident, and that effectively ends his career while he's still in his 20s. So Fran Waters of Shelburne is the man to lead the line of the Irish attack against Italy in Turin.
So I'm going to go through the team here, and I'm going to give you the match report as detailed here by Donald Cullen. We'll talk about the jerseys we're wearing in a minute. If anybody's watching on YouTube, you'll be wondering what on earth we're wearing. We've got Harry Cannon from Bowes, Frank Brady, Fordson, so come back to him in a second, Jack McCarthy from Bowes, Mick Foley, who we're going to talk to his family later in the podcast, and delighted to do so, Dennis Doyle, Shamrock Rovers, James Connolly, Fordsons, John Joe Flood, Shamrock Rovers, Joe Grace, Drumcondra, Frank... It has Watters here, but are you saying it's Walters?
Well, Watters, W-A-T-T-E-R-S. So I don't know if it's Watters or Watters. I'd say probably Watters is probably...
We'll say, okay, alright. Shells, Bob Fulham from Shamrock Rovers, Jack Fagan, Shamrock Rovers, captained by Mick Foley. Now, the report here, Irish team left Dublin on Wednesday and arrived in Italy on Saturday. This long journey had its effect on the game, and the Italians dominated the first half. Now, Balconelli, is it? Opened the score.
Balancieri.
Balancieri. Sorry, apologies there to our Italian listeners. Opened the scoring with a powerful drive and Magnozzi added a second when the Irish move broke down. A minute before the break, Bernardini scored with a powerful close-range shot. The Irish improved in the second half and created 2 good chances, one of which resulted in both Flood and Deplat being knocked unconscious.
This is a recurring theme.
Brilliant, it is, yeah. I mean, you go through these reports, and first people get knocked out. Anyway, both resumed later, as is the way.
Yeah, that was standard.
Yeah, get up there. That's magic sponge after treatment. So 12,000 people turned up. There's a suggestion actually in another account here, No Foreign Game by James Quinn, that there was the weather played its part.
Yeah, so ahead of the game, the Italians thought this was going to be a big turnout for this match. They thought they would get a very good attendance. And say, Italy had backed us at FIFA to become a member. Italy and Switzerland were 2 big proponents of Ireland joining FIFA. They've been advertising this match heavily. It's in newspapers. It's on cinema reels as advertisements for this game. So, and one of the things we were talking about that big long travel, that it's by boat and train through France and Switzerland. The players arrived less than 24 hours before the match. One of the requests by the Irish team is that the game be held in northern Italy to reduce the travel distance for them. So originally it's going to be Milan, it's moved to Turin. And they were hoping for 20,000 plus, but it starts bucketing down the day of the game and only 12,000 turn up.
So it says here, the Free State approached the game on the 21st of March 1926 with some confidence. Most of the team had played in a 3-1 victory over the Irish League a week earlier and had high hopes of beating the Italians. They were further encouraged by the cold and misty weather. It had rained all morning, but stopped just before the game. As the Italians wore Savoy blue in honour of the ruling House of Savoy, the Irish wore green shirts for the first time. And we think this is the type of shirt they would have worn. That's by our reckoning. That's what they would have worn. So green shirts for the first time, because previously they would have worn St. Patrick's blue. That's the shirt they would have worn in 1927, but that's for our next episode. FAIS officials insisted on the Irish tricolour being flown in the stadium and on being told that none was available, produced their own. Once the game started, it became clear that the long journey had taken a toll on the Irish and they had underestimated their opponents. The Italians were 3 goals up at half time and coasted to a 3-0 win. You may have heard the name Brady there. The last reading I will do.
Yes. Reading from the book of Liam.
Reading from the book of Liam. Bro, Chippy Brady. He speaks about his background, his family background. Liam Brady does.
Steeped in football.
Yeah.
Of various codes.
He says, my granduncle Frank, although a fine Gaelic footballer, broke the mould when he opted for soccer instead. I guess it was because there was the option to make a few quid out of your talent, but I'd love to know the sequence of events. He was born in 1902, growing up and steeped in the GA in Parnells. He was a teenager while the war between the IRA and British forces in Ireland was at its worst. Atrocities and tit-for-tat killings were a common occurrence. Frank would have been 18. What was happening in his life? What was going through his mind? I know he played for Belfast Celtic, then found his way to Cork and played for the Fordsons factory team in the League of Ireland. We knew about his achievements, especially his Ireland caps. He played twice for the Irish Free State in the 20s, home and away against Italy. And soccer was now in the Brady family, though there was never any sense in our house that one sport was more worthy than another or more Irish, which is a kind of a pretext for a later chat that we might have about Liam Brady and his involvement with Gaelic games and soccer. So they're the type of lads that are playing in this game.
If I can just go back to Sean, because he talks about Fordsons there. Obviously,
yes.
They're the team of the Ford factory down in Cork City.
There's 2 players here, Frank Brady and James Connolly.
A.K.A. Sally Connolly. Again, we don't know how many ways called Sally Connolly. Is the James Connolly a connection with 1916? Probably
and Mick Foley is known as Mick Boxer Foley.
They love a good nickname back then. Kruger Fagan as well as part of that team.
That was.
But as Sean Ryan says here, reading for myself here, so the team that stepped out at the Stadio Comunale.
I'll take your $3 and I raise you one. Go over there.
It consisted of 3 civil servants, 3 casual dockers, 2 employees of Henry Ford, which are Sally Connolly and Frank Brady, a bookmaker, an army officer, which is Harry Cannon in goals, and 1 member of the unemployed. Now,
why do I feel like the civil servants weren't bringing much to the game? Do you know what I mean? They were kind of maybe quite studious and
coasting.
Yeah. Anyway,
but it's
sorry for any civil servants who are listening in here, appalled by our stereotypes that we're throwing around the place. Anyway,
but obviously he moves to Cork. There's a bit of money working the Ford factory and probably a few quid playing there as well. Interesting to say, Frank Brady is playing for Fordsons, but he isn't playing. He's actually in dispute with the club at the time, and they're kind of freezing him out of the first team. It's only when he comes back from this tour that he actually is back in the Fordsons side, which is quite interesting when you think about it. But and just one thing I want to mention, just going on at this time as well, or around 1926. Obviously, a lot of things have changed. So, a lot of these players are involved in a charity match for the Drumcollar Cinema Fire that happened in later 1926. They play a charity match for that. It's the same weekend.
What was the nature of that fire? Just to remind me.
It was basically, obviously, popular entertainment, sports and cinema is a huge thing in Ireland. These small parish halls were being converted into cinemas. No fire and health and safety. It's probably the closest thing to something like the Stardust disaster we have in 1920s Ireland.
Yeah.
And dozens of people are killed in this fire. And there's a few people we mentioned. Glasgow Celtic, Willie Maley, who we mentioned in the first episode, they do a huge fundraising.
It seems to be a kind of a feature of this time.
Yeah.
Football matches, soccer matches are used for fundraisers.
And an awful lot of these players, Frank Brady, Mick Foley, all these guys are in raise a charity match for this game. The kick-off of the League of Ireland season is actually delayed to facilitate that match. Right. And literally the following day, Glasgow Celtic come back over to play Shamrock Rovers in the opening of Milltown. So that's all happening in around this time, 1926. In the League of Ireland. And just to say, this is a full League of Ireland team because, and it's going to be a recurring theme throughout our series, especially this area of the series. English clubs, British clubs, Scottish clubs won't release Irish players. So Ireland do try to get Patsy Gallagher. They do try to get other players released to play for this game. Now,
did the IFA get them? Did they release for the IFA? IFA Ireland team?
They generally are. The fact that it's quite a long trip. It's several days travelling, and one thing we should mention is it's actually prolonged because they stop off and play a game in Paris against a team called Cercle Athletic de Paris. We've kind of mentioned them briefly in previous matches that this is a club that's come to play in Dublin in 1923 when no one else was coming to play in Ireland. So maybe it's a feeling that they owe something to the club there. It's a 1-1 draw. Bob Fulham scores in that game.
Right.
They're styled as the Irish Nomads. So it's a long trip, and I think the issue is that they try to get Jimmy Dunn released by Sheffield United, and the clubs don't want to do it because they said they don't want their players being gone for 7-8 days at a time. And we'll come on to the next match. Generally speaking, when we do get cross-channel players released, it's generally players who are playing in the reserves who aren't needed for the first team and they're willing to sacrifice to an international match.
So, I mean, there had been a game in 1925. The IFA team obviously have been playing in the
Home Nations Championship.
People like Tom Farquharson, Billy Gillespie, Patsy Gallagher, Mick O'Brien, they all played for the IFA Ireland team. But it's, we're playing a game a year.
Yeah.
We didn't play anything. If even. 23, we didn't play at all. 24, we played 4 games because of the Olympics. 25, no game. 26, 1 game.
Yeah.
And this is it. I'm assuming they would have been a little bit disappointed for being... Okay, they can put it down to the travelling, but they were fairly comprehensively the second best side. Really, they are thumped 3-0. I mean, they were 3-0 at half time.
They are, and look, I suppose Italy are kind of an emerging power. They weren't the strongest side in the early 20s, but they're improving, and we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is in the next episode. Stay tuned, folks.
Yes.
But one of the things I want to talk about, I want to maybe talk a little bit about some of those Italian players because the 3 guys who score all have interesting stories. So the guy who gets the first goal, Adolfo Balancieri, and I hope I'm not mangling these names.
I've already mangled this.
So he's playing for Torino, who were one of the dominant sides at the time. He's still Italy's 6th highest goal scorer. He's the highest scoring midfielder in Italian football history. So he scores the opening goal.
Which is just, by the way, at this period, I'm not sure when the offside rule changed, but
it's around this time. This is 1927, so maybe a year later.
Yeah. So still, there's 3 players between the goal and the player who receives the ball, and also the back pass rule is still in vogue. So any goal scoring record from that time is pretty impressive. Yeah, sorry. The
second guy to score is a guy called Mario Magnazzi. He plays for Livorno, and what's interesting, he has a brief spell at Milan, but he's from Livorno. He spends most of his career at Livorno, and a friend of the show, someone we've mentioned previously, Jack Kirwan.
Yes.
He friend of the show. Yeah.
He's dead.
He's been dead for
years. Yeah, go on. Friend of the pod.
But Jack Kirwan would have been his manager because Jack Kirwan, who we mentioned in our Dutch episode, who had been a manager of Ajax Amsterdam, had also managed Livorno and of course the famous Bohemians. But he would have been Mario's manager in the, I think it's 23-24 season. The following season, Magnazzi ends up top scorer in Serie A. So he would have been familiar with a Dubliner, at least Jack Kirwan or a Wicklow man. And then the other guy who scores, the final goal, Fulvio Bernardini. Bernardini was a smashing player, but he's probably most famous as a manager. He's manager of a great Bologna team Decades later, in the 60s, that is one of the most stylish and attacking sides, and win Serie A, and a rare upset when it's just upsetting the cart with the Juve and the Milan clubs in a period of dominance. So they're all very interesting and high profile people.
He becomes Italy manager.
He does, yeah.
And 1974-75.
Yeah, and actually just on the Italy manager bit here as well, there's an interesting story, and I told this at a recent talk in the Project Earth here last year about the visibility of gay and queer people in football, and we kind of think that's a very modern thing, but Italy in the 20s, a guy who was won 4 league titles as a manager of Juventus, he was also Italian national manager, Carlo Carcano. Only other Juve manager to win 4 consecutive league titles is Massimiliano Allegri. So a guy who replaced Carlo Bigato, who plays in this match against Ireland, replaces Carcano as Juve manager in 1934, and it's alleged that this is because Carcano has had an affair with one of his players, and that several of the Juventus players are actually in homosexual relationships.
Right.
But this is kind of
That's
brushed under the carpet,
no-no.
and this experienced player Bigato replaces Carcano, and Carcano was effectively almost written out of Italian football history, and it's only in recent years that he's beginning to get a bit more credence, credibility for the fact that he was an incredibly successful coach and manager.
Well, I have to say, even after 100 years, soccer has a big way to travel. The women's game is by far way ahead of the men's game in terms of players feeling comfortable about being out, about being open about their sexuality. Yeah. There's still a lot of homophobia in the game. But anyway, okay, so it's an interesting time actually in Italy. Some of these players do play in the 34 World Cup, win the World Cup. There's a Rosetta, Virginio Rosetta, who plays in the 1934 World Cup. He's the captain in the first game. So there's a little bit of an overlap with that 34 team that win the World Cup. Interestingly enough, not in any way suggesting that this was a revenge attempt, but there was a Dubliner who shot to prominence the next week in Rome, a week after the game.
Fantastic choice.
There was a strike, an attempt at to murder Benito Mussolini in Rome. A Dubliner called Violet Gibson, a week after this 3-0 loss, tries to exact revenge. Although maybe it has absolutely no connection whatsoever.
No.
But there's a lot of stuff happening in Italy at the time of an Irish connection.
And she is her and her brother, actually a plaque was unveiled for her only last year in Merrion Square.
But she misses.
She misses. Like, she takes aim. She's about to shoot Mussolini in the head, and he turns to make some gesticulation. And instead of shooting him inside the head, it actually just grazes his nose.
Right. And
then she's set upon by the crowd and is very lucky not to be killed there on the spot.
She doesn't even knock him on. So there's more Italians who are knocked unconscious in the game itself, again, in the 3-0 game, that are actually done in an assassination attempt. But
Violet Gibson, a Dubliner, does try and shoot Mussolini literally a week after this match.
Right. But we're not in any way suggesting
that there's any of
the Gibson family are horrified and suggesting that as revenge of this 3-0 loss,
that she was first to action. No,
Violet decided to get violent.
Yes.
Okay, so we're up and running, and this is considered to be without the constraints of an Olympic overarching regulations that we can play wherever we want to play. Players who are getting paid, and this is our best 11.
And on the subject of pay, so there are 2 amateurs in the squad, Harry Cannon and Jack McCarthy, who get an inscribed gold medal.
Because they're both players.
They're both players, and both are strictly amateurs. And everyone else gets £6 is the match fee. Mick Foley, who we're going to talk about now, on the way back they do play that game in Paris, and Mick Foley asks for a second match fee for that game, which is refused. Financially, the game isn't a success. I think the Italians guarantee a £100 reserve. The trip cost nearly £700 to get over to Turin and back, and at the end of the year the FAI book show a deficit of £53. So I suppose financially it's not a success, but we have gone to Italy, we played our game, and there's a commitment from Italy that they will play a match against Ireland the following year in Dublin.
Right, and we'll talk about that on the next episode, which is actually an Italian B-side.
Yes.
And it's actually played, bizarrely enough, in Lansdowne Road, so it has all sorts of question marks over it, but it's still given legitimacy by the FAI. So
now we might go to the Foleys, and one thing that is interesting, that from talking to the guys, Michael Foley and David Foley, Danny Burke, who is the great grandson of Mick Boxer Foley. Almost 100 years today, just over 100 years after Mick Foley captained the League of Ireland against the Welsh League. Danny Burke captained the Irish under-15s against Hungary. So there is a familial connection stretching back over a century, which is fantastic. And we're going to have a quick chat with father and son, Michael and David Foley now, about Mick Boxer Foley, his time at Shelbourne, his time at Leeds City, not Leeds United, Leeds City, and his role as captaining Ireland in that game against Italy. So we're delighted to welcome to the podcast Mick Foley and David Foley, and the reason we're chatting to you today, lads, is that your grandfather and great-grandfather respectively was Mick Boxer Foley, captain of the Irish team, who went to Turin in 1926. So delighted to have you on the podcast. Mick, I suppose, as his grandson, do you have any memories of him as your granddad, or were you too young really to remember him much?
Probably too young at the time. He was. I was 7 when he passed away. So I think in them times that the grandkids didn't go to the grandparents a lot. So I have no recollection really of him at all. His football and conquest is all we have is what's down on paper and what family members have been saying over the years, but nothing really at all.
But you have some of the memorabilia there. You've shown us just before we started.
We have the memorabilia, yeah.
So you have his cap from that game and some photographs of him shaking hands with the Italian captain and so on, and the pennant that was swapped from the Italian national team. And obviously it's something you're well aware of. You're both football fans. You're aware of his past. So maybe just tell us a bit about his career. Obviously you're saying he's from that part around South Dublin. Began his career at Shelbourne, probably the club he's most associated with, but he had a very successful career in England as well.
Yeah, he was in England for seven seasons with Leeds City, as they were called at the time, and out of 5 of those 7 years, he only missed one game. So he was pretty prolific with his matching, but he finished with there was a fallout of Leeds City were relegated or disqualified from the league for some overpayments by two players. So the team was disbanded, and I think he only played one more match after that with Leeds City, and that was his final match, and he came back home to Ireland here. And he continued his career with Shelbourne, which they said was the longest part of his Shelbourne career.
And he was a league champion with them a couple of times.
How many years that was for. But then from the early 30s, he had 2 seasons with Dolphin United. And I think he hung up the boots after that.
And when you were growing up, were you very aware of his legacy, of his name and his achievements?
Certainly was. Yeah, very much aware. Although my father didn't talk much about it, which would have been Boxer Foley's son. He wasn't much of a footballer himself. He never really played football, but he did the small amount of info that we got off him. But he wasn't one for keeping all the info. He would say, I wouldn't know about that. You'd have to ask my aunt, which was Boxer Foley's daughter. So we only had small bits of his memory.
But in fairness, we did have his photos were pride of place in my grandfather's house. The team photo that we have there for the Wales versus Ireland match as well. The interleague match. So as his grandson or his great grandson, I remember those memories from my granddad's house and seeing and who's that man up there or who's that team up there and hearing the stories about it, you know.
So just to explain, we did to people who are listening in, he did play in those 2 games in 1924, these interleague games between the the Free State League and the Welsh League, and then the game against Glasgow Celtic, which we covered in our very first episode. And then he's on this, which currently the FAI regard as the first FAI senior international game against Italy away. And the Irish team left Dublin on the Wednesday, didn't arrive till the Saturday, and they played a game on the Sunday, and this may have influenced the fact that they lost 3-0.
Yeah. Well, they reckon that the 3 goals were scored in the first half.
Yeah.
So the we wouldn't call it jet lag, but the boat lag probably hadn't been out of their legs in the first half. But the second half was a much improved performance by all accounts. And they do themselves proud in the first half, where all the damage was, or second half, where all the damage was done in the first half.
And one thing we were reading back through the records is that they played a match on their return back to Dublin. They stopped off in Paris to play a team called Cercle Athletic de Paris, who had played a couple of games in Ireland beforehand. There's obviously a good connection there with that club, and that a credible 1-1 draw. But interesting that Mick Foley then asked for an additional payment, because I think they got paid £6 for their match fee against, which in fairness was decent money at the time for their match fee against Italy, but they got paid nothing for the Paris game, and it was Michael Foley who went and asked, could we get appearance money for that, and they said no, but we'll give you a physical cap, international cap. So I suppose as the captain, he probably saw it as his role to represent the players and say, look, we throw us a few quid for that.
Yeah, maybe so, but we had no recollection that they played that second match or anything about it in the football archives. So it's news to us that you're telling us about it there.
Do you have any knowledge as to why he was chosen as captain, or was he just maybe a natural leader and a person of great reputation in the side?
I suppose having played in England maybe for Leeds City, who were high up in the first division during the sort of 1913 to 1915, they finished fourth in the league in one of his seasons. So potentially, I suppose, being a professional footballer over in England and having that gravitas, maybe that came with that. Potentially, he was 38 years of age, I think, at the time as well. So potentially one of the older statesmen of the team. But yeah, I think maybe the boxer name, maybe he was feared as well. I'm not sure, that way. Maybe that's part of it as well,
Because the rest of the side are all, based in the League of Ireland, Bows, Fortsons, Shells, Shamrock Rovers. So he was one of the only players who actually played abroad, played in England, played in front of big crowds.
Yeah. As you said, he played in front of crowds of over 30,000 in the past.
So he wouldn't have been intimidated by 12,000.
Played against Bradford for Leeds, 32,000 was the record attendance, and he played in front of which I don't know how many people were at the Italian match, but
I think it was about 12,000 because it was very lash and rain in Turin as well. They expected a big crowd. They did a lot of promotion for the game, but then it bucketed down and only 12,000 ticket payers turned up.
Which the Irish thought was going to be an advantage for them, but then 3-0 down at half time. Right,
actually,
okay.
the photograph we have there, we might show you that.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, hold it up there, lads.
He's actually no, the photograph of the match. Where's that? Yeah, it's over there. So as you can see here, he's actually smiling for the camera and looking at the camera.
Yeah.
I don't know when you can get that.
Yeah, we can see it there. Yeah,
he's changing the pennants.
And it's looking straight ahead, so he seems happy out. So he's not nervous at all by the looks of that.
And they're wearing the green because the Italians, because the traditional Italian colour of blue.
The Azzurri.
The Azzurri. See, Jerry's wearing his blue Italian jersey. So it's possibly the first time that the Irish team wore green, because they had worn blue before that. Yeah. And that the team in 24, they play 4 matches, no game in 25. So there's probably a bit of there's a break between these two sides. It's very much a different lineup that plays. So Mick obviously had great reputation, seen as a leader, seen as somebody who could handle the pressure of, captaining a side in that strange environment in front of that hostile crowd.
And looking at the team there, he is, there are a couple other experienced players, but he's certainly the most experienced and the guy who's probably played in the bigger games against the best quality opposition.
And I mean, what does it mean to your family though to have a senior international? Because we mentioned before we're currently trying to get senior caps for the 24 team.
Really,
does it mean a lot to you?
I mean, it has meant lots over the years, down through the years. Like we all played football, sort of, in our young days, but nothing to the standard of Boxer Foley as such.
It's huge honour for the family. You know, we're so proud that, you know, Boxer is the first captain for Ireland in his first international. You know, it means everything. You know, and look, we didn't. My dad doesn't really remember him, but look, the memories are there. You know, the stories are there from handed down, and very proud.
That's what we're trying to do a little bit with the podcast, is to bring these names back to life, because we've all heard about the teams of the 70s, 80s, 90s, but it's these players who...
Superstars of their day, but maybe forgotten in the midst of times, that he was playing in a match 98 years ago, but that was important. That in some ways they were more important because the Football Association was still a new thing. We didn't know how it was going to work out.
Yeah, and the sort of the anti-soccer feeling in the country at the time, the state not being very favourable towards football, and these guys, and deliberately... The Irish flag was flown. I understand that the FAI insisted on the flag being the tricolour being flown. So
even like getting the boat to Italy and all, I'd say that was a big deal for people in the 20s to be getting on a boat.
Not many Irishmen went to Turin or Paris like the lads did.
No. No, I know, it's super. It's absolutely super.
Yeah.
And are you still Shells fans as a result? Can I even ask that question?
Always was. Yeah. I mean, I always brought David to Tolka Park as a young kid. Now, I worked on the north side, so I'd have to come home from the north side, up here in the south side, get dinner, get ready, go back across the north side and go to Tolka Park.
Yeah, I remember those days,
And we used to park outside the Captain Cage, there in Drumcondra. You couldn't park there now because
you're parking in a bus lane.
There's people yelling and clamping all of it. For match evenings, and then you'd be home then about 10:30, 11:15. So we always went across to Tolka Park as such. You know, the good Shelbourne teams, going back earlier to Paddy Roberts, Freddie Strahan, Joe Haverty.
Joe Haverty, right? Yeah. My dad remembers Joe Haverty from Whitehall, same estate. What happened to Mick anyway later in his life? You know, did he keep his involvement in football? Was it a big part of his life in his later years?
We don't really.
No.
You said he became a bookmaker.
I heard somewhere down the line that he played cricket for Ireland.
Right.
Well, that's something for us to look into.
And whereas you didn't have to be that physically fit for cricket probably in them days, because you're standing there waiting on the ball to come at such. And either you swing or you don't swing, and then you connect and good. But
we do know that he became a bookmaker, and he had two bookie shops in the city centre. Was it
one in Bachelor's Walk, and I'm not sure where they
Temple Bar or somewhere around Temple Bar area.
So he was tangentially involved in sport still,
Still involved in the sport, yeah. And the money end of the sport,
Well, look,
making a few pounds.
Well, look, that's great, gents, and it's just been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Real honour, yeah.
And likewise, lads.
I'll look into the cricket connection and see if I can find anything on that.
But, please let us know, Jerry, if you find anything.
If we're successful and the 1924 team get full international caps, he won't be the first captain of the Irish team anymore. But I'm quite sure you don't mind that. But still,
no.
To have a senior international in your family and the captain of the Irish team, that's one hell of a legacy. So we just want to thank you for coming on and sharing the memory.
Thanks for having us, man.
We want to keep the memory alive, big time.
Absolutely.
Mick Boxer Foley.
Thanks a million, lads.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
All right, cheers. Talk to you again.
Bye.
Well, that was really, really interesting, thoroughly enjoyable. And next week we're going to turn to the game against Italy B, which actually comes after two interleague matches, but we won't really go into them because we don't consider them to be senior international. But the first, if you like, recognised FAI international in the current regulations, Home International at Lansdowne Road, Ireland versus Italy B, and we'll talk about that next week on our glorious podcast Each Game on Its Merits.
I want to mention as well, we'll be talking a little bit more about maybe Mussolini, assassination attempts and all, with our guest Chris Lee, to talk about what was happening in Italian football at the time and why the Italians were becoming an emerging force in world football. Stay tuned.